Hey, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, my friend, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Good morning. This is Zach coming to you from Washington, D.C., and today we are discussing tungsten lamps, light plot disclaimers, should my department be accredited, wacky stage directions, color balancing between projections and stage lighting, all on Light Talk.
And this is David coming to you from the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers. Okay, welcome everyone to episode 289. And for your information, we normally tape this show in the afternoons, but due to our schedules this week, we have to do it late at night. So once again, we've got Light Talk After Dark.
Oh, that's why Zach did his FM radio voice.
That's right.
Yes. I was waiting for Steely Dan to come on in the background.
Well, That's coming soon. But anyway, speaking of Zach, Zach's with us today. Hey, man, what's going on?
Not much. I'm happy to be back and just starting to get ready for our adventure in Las Vegas coming up next month.
That's right. Big adventure. We're going to be talking about that in a minute. But let me tell you something, Zach. Personally, I'm really glad you're back because you know what that means? It means that Stan's not on the show.
That means Snoot is not going to call.
Zach, I don't know if you've been listening. I don't know, but we've been having some major issues. And every time that Stan's on the show, something happens. Am I crazy or what, Steve? I mean, come on.
I think he has been a little flippant with our new law firm. And, you know, there's a little pushback coming his way. And rightly deserved.
He does live in the state where laws are flexible.
Well, flexible. I thought laws there are like alternative laws. You know, you got regular laws, you got alternative laws. But I don't know. It's just really great to have a normal episode.
This is the first time I think anyone's ever said this. I was contributing to something by bringing normalcy.
So I assume that Snoot's not calling today. Thank God. I mean, we love Snoot. She's fantastic. But between her and Stan, it's just too much. It's just going crazy. And now Dennis Size is involved. Now, you know, she went after Dennis last week, and Dennis wants to rebut. It's going to be crazy. So yeah, we're going to put that all on the side until Stan's back on. And that day I'm taking a double dose of Xanax. I'm telling you that right now.
Well, I mean, today's episode is going to be much calmer.
Totally calm.
You know, Zach can make a cassette recording of it and give it to his offspring to take to their school to play. You know, as they change classes in the hallway, you can hear his dad talking.
All right. Well, thank you, Zach, for being with us. Let's go right to the news. Hey, we've got today LDI news. First, Ethan Steimel will be hosting Artistic Finance at LDI for a second year in a row. Isn't that great? Congratulations, Ethan.
That's a serious podcast. That tells you how to save your money and become a millionaire at age 35.
That's true. If you want to learn how to go broke, listen to us. We're experts in that, how not to handle your money. But Ethan, congratulations. And you know something? It's about time we had him on our show, don't you think?
Yeah, because that'll put an end to his podcast. You know, that'll completely discredit him everywhere, and we'll get those viewers.
Well, okay. Well, we're going to have to work that out. So we have him as a guest because he's a really funny guy. And I think that he would fit in great. Especially now that we're probably going to be sued by our law firm in a civil suit or libel suit, actually. Oh, my God. I didn't want to talk about that. Now I'm upset again. Anyway, so also, our brother Zach has a very exciting projections workshop at LDI going on. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it, Zach?
I'm actually doing several. So I don't know if you know, but I believe that this is the first year where the Digital Signage Experience Expo and LDI are sort of getting married. So this will be their first dance as husband and wife.
Will there be like an Elvis impersonator doing the ceremony?
I mean, it's Vegas. But the nice thing about it is that everybody who's attending LDI is also permitted to attend the Digital Signage Experience.
Fantastic.
And vice versa. So they can kind of cross-pollinate and check out what's going on at the other event. I mean, it's not the same as a couple of years ago when the cannabis convention was also
Oh, that's always the best. I know. Or the porn convention. Sometimes the porn convention's there too.
Right. But it'll be very interesting. So actually, one of the sessions that I'm doing is sort of a session that is a LDI and digital signage experience session that is titled LED Screens, a cross-section between public art and advertising. And that's
that
on
pretty
Thursday.
much covers it all. Right
Yeah. So on Thursday, I'm doing that session. On Friday, I have a bunch of programming for media servers sessions that go from the basics of how to just get started and organized to much more specific system integration and how to connect your machine to other devices. And then I'm really excited on Saturday, actually doing a projection mapping session with Casey Wilkerson from Disney, who we had on the show.
Of course. We've had her on our show.
Yeah. We're gonna talk a little bit about a project that we collaborated on, which is very exciting. And one of the things in a lot of the sessions that I'm doing, but especially in this one, that I'm hoping to really touch upon is not just how to do it, but how to prepare for these things. Because a lot of times it's sort of I can tell you once you have all your equipment, what to do, but to help people figure out what do I need to do for projection mapping to be ready to do a project like this. I know I just can't open up Photoshop and make pictures. So really the nuts and bolts of preparing for a projection mapping project.
So this is on Thursday and Friday.
Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And then, of course, we have our live show.
Right. Then we have our live show on Saturday afternoon at 4. Right. And then we all pass out.
Right.
Pretty much. Wow.
Or we might pass out during the show.
Well, we've done that before. I may do it tonight. We never know. But yeah, I think that's fantastic, Zach. So go on to the LDI website, check out the schedule, and sign up for these events, because that's how you're going to get involved. That's how you can get trained. It's a great opportunity. These are the best in the world, these people. So it's great. It's great. And speaking of our show at LDI, guess what I got yesterday?
Disco mites.
That's right. But we're not using them this year. I got the instant collector's item limited edition Light Talk Fezzes have arrived from China.
Oh.
They've arrived. They are in my hand. I was worried because, I look at these ships every day out in the harbor out here outside my house, and they're waiting to unload their crap from China. And apparently some of that crap was my Fezzes. So we're going to have limited edition Light Talk Fezzes. Only 6 are in existence in the world. That's it. 6. They're going to be autographed by the Lumen Brothers and Sista, and they will be given to 6 lucky listeners who present us with questions at our LDI show in Las Vegas on Saturday. And
I like that.
I predict that they will be on eBay a week following LDI. I bet.
Or in the garbage can outside the room.
The winners are required to wear them for the rest of LDI.
Well, we're going to be coming and wearing them. So we're going to start the show with them on. But then we're going to take them off, put them on the table, and then you can come up when you ask your question and pick the fez of your choice. Now, just a note, I am bald, so your chances of getting hair mites from my fez is very low compared to Zach and Steve and Stan. And Ellen. So there you go. All right. So that's really exciting. And you know something? I bet Ethan is not giving away that quality swag like we are. He's probably giving away fake $100 bills with his photo on it.
Well, he might wonder if purchasing Chinese-made fezzes is fiscally responsible.
What I think he goes to the different banks in Manhattan and gets those free pins, and he'll be giving out free swiped pins.
Right.
It's a finance show.
Money clips. That's what he's giving away. Money clips.
Remember when banks used to give you like a 13-inch black and white TV or a toaster?
Yeah. Those were the days. Those were the days. All right, let's get on with the show. Steve has our first listener question.
Okay, it's Arnie from Georgia. And Arnie writes, so with everyone calling for the death of tungsten lamps, why is no one bringing up carbon arcs? What a mess. They're horrible.
Carbon arcs? Do people still use them? Come on.
Arnie, I looked this up online. And when I type in carbon arc follow spot, the little line that follows it is now obsolete. So I think no one is bringing. You have a good point. They are nasty and messy and smelly, and oh yeah, they're just terrible. But I could not find a manufacturer still making a carbon arc light. I did see that occasionally carbon arc light is used for searchlights, and there's still some of those World War II searchlights running around. So, I mean, that's carbon arc base. And I guess another little thing I saw about a carbon arc is it is also used because it produces a high intensity of ultraviolet light.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. So I think no one's bringing them up because we started phasing them out. And I would say, bless your heart, we started phasing them out probably in 1984. I think that was, you started really seeing arc lights going away and discharge lights coming into arenas. And the reason it took so long was the discharge lights were difficult to transport, and you always had to wear gloves, and they gave you like a 50-cent face shield to wear to kind of to convince you that you were being protected if this lamp under like 37 atmospheres exploded, it wasn't going to hurt you.
Yeah, right.
So that's if you go back in history, and you'll see the first big kind of success that those arc lamps had, the discharge lamps. Go back and look at Diana Ross in Central Park, and it's raining her out, and every light in the place has been destroyed, turned off, or shorted out, except these 4 follow spots from Japan that were discharge lamps that later Colortran would buy and turn them into their flagship discharge light. So, no, we don't use them.
You mentioned the Diana Ross concert. Go and check out Woodstock, the movie. Chipmunk.
Oh, yeah.
You remember, you originally was going to have an entire lighting rig overhead, but the the ceiling that could not support the trusses. So all those lights that were going to be overhead were replaced by 8 carbon arc follow spots that were on towers. There were on 4 towers, 2 on each tower. I believe that's what it was. May have been 12. I'm not too sure. But
it rained there too.
When it rained, they had to shut everything down. Absolutely, because it's dangerous. I mean, you're talking about a lot of voltage going through. And I remember we had carbon arc follow spots in my undergraduate school, and they were obsolete then. That was 1978, I believe. So I don't know about 84, but you shouldn't be using them. You should not be using them. They're a disaster.
All I can say is if you're using Woodstock and Diana Ross in Central Park as your references, then clearly they are old.
Yeah, half our listeners are going, what's Woodstock and who's Diana Ross?
Anyway, Anonymous from Parts Unknown asks, I teach lighting design at a mid-level university, and my faculty is debating whether or not to continue our relationship with IRTA and NAST. We do use IRTA for graduate student recruitment, but what are the advantages and disadvantages of keeping our accreditation with these organizations? All right, well, Steve and I were sort of talking about this before the show today because I have been a part of 2 NAST accreditations at SMU, and I believe 3 or 4 where I am right now. So I've been through this. And I know the difficulties of doing this because you have to do a self-evaluation, okay? And it's a self-study. And then you have to write up a document, a self-critical document of, where you meet the standards and where you do not meet the standards and how you plan on meeting those standards that you're not meeting at the time. And it's always been like a pain in the butt to do these things because usually the head of the programs end up writing them. So I was the head of design, and so I had to write the design production area section of it. But, even though it's a pain, and this is just my own personal opinion, I think it's really important to do it. Because if you're not forced to do a self-study every 7 years, you're never going to do a self-study. And I think the process, just looking back in the 20, 30 years that I've been doing this craziness, the process is worth something. Also, there are other reasons why I think these 2 organizations are important, and that's because they have certain minimal standards to be accredited. And you could lose your accreditation if you don't meet those standards. And I think those standards are important. Hopefully you're above the standards, but I've been in departments where we were below the standards. We had to have a really good plan on addressing those things. So that's really important. And also in some schools, if your report comes out and says, hey, your department's still using all tungsten fixtures and everything needs to be LED, come on, guys, let's get on track. That has to happen. Then you could present that to your provost and your dean and say, look, it needs to be done for us to keep our accreditation. So they can use it as a tool. Steve, I know you've been a part of this. What do you think?
Well, I think that's how I got my job at SMU. Was the school I was at was that too. The school I was at was going through NAST accreditations, and David's right. One of the benefits of being part of NAST is you write all this up, and then an outside observer comes in, and this outside observer was simply saying, what you're calling a rehearsal room, you shouldn't be calling it a rehearsal room. It's you don't have this or that or the other. But this person was pointing out all the ways that we were lacking. So what was nice about that is a neutral party. You could take the comments of a neutral party who had no dog in the fight and say, look, we need a piece of Marley. We need some mirrors on a wall. We need a bathroom within 20 feet. They could just go down the list. This is what everybody else has. If you're trying to have this accreditation, this is what you need too. So I think, I'm not the biggest fan of NAST in the world, but I think David makes a very good case for it. Now, IRTA, on the other hand, I'm a huge fan of IRTA, and those guys are out in the trenches working every day, trying to make life a little bit better for students. So I really appreciate all they do in organizing auditions and interviews, in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, and in Las Vegas. I've just found them that I'll be fair about this. They have become my friends over the years. NAST is, and they don't have to be my friend, but NAST is kind of a faceless beast. And IRTA, I can pick up the phone and call any one of them, and they may be annoyed that that's my 15th call of the day over something simple, but they always take time and they answer and they work through the problems and they help me connect with students. So I think IRTA. I think that's awfully important. And they're now branching out and not only doing interviews on the graduate level for designers, they're now looking at bringing that same idea if you're looking for a technology program or a design program on the undergraduate level. They're now doing exploration and how they can help facilitate that. So my hat's off to them.
Yeah, I think this is all great. The any kind of sort of standardization that can be, not necessarily enforced, but suggested between the different schools, and it helps the school, it helps the student, and it really kind of helps get the things that distract from learning out of the way. So people can really just focus on, their education and not have to worry about, in my school, we didn't have lights and fuses and floors and there was no bathroom. So I think that all this standardization really helps, levels the playing field so we can really just focus on learning our craft.
Yeah, and and they do some very valuable things, like they keep departments from putting 60 students in an acting class, things like that.
Yeah, that's great.
and unfortunately, what's happening at universities nowadays is that not all, but many of them are becoming education for profit centers. They're like all giant University of Phoenixes, and that's a big problem, especially when you're dealing this type of training, because it's dangerous. If you don't have the right supervision, the right mentoring, and you're not, the faculty is mentoring too many people, all of a sudden something slips through the holes and someone gets hurt. Forget about the education, it could be dangerous. Right. So, there are a lot of things that they do, especially on the safety side and of the education side, that assures that students will get a fair shake when they go to the universities.
Yeah. I saw a meme the other day that said, if the sports department has the highest paid faculty at your university, then the education is just the side hustle.
Exactly. That's right.
So Brent in Port Jefferson says, I'm having trouble matching the colors of my projections with the colored gels used in the lighting. Do you have any tips or tricks? This is a really interesting question, which is something that I've dealt with many times. And it's funny that you sometimes would even think, I'm just projecting black and white images, but, it still feels off. My white doesn't feel like the white of the lights. It's a interesting challenge. And I will tell you, one of the secret tricks that I have done in the past is, if we really can't figure out how to match it, sometimes we'll light it with the projections, because that way we know it's always going to be the same kind of color balance. And sometimes we'll do that not just because we can't match lighting, but we might run into a situation where it's really challenging for lighting to match us. I find like some of the sepia tones are sometimes challenging, and it's just easier for me to use my projector. We're at a point now where projectors are bright enough and quiet enough that they can be a lighting tool as well. So you should do that. And the other thing I would always suggest too is not to be afraid to try putting some gel in front of your projector and seeing if that kind of pushes you more into the realm of where lighting is, if you are not able to sort of figure it out in the media server or in your content. There's lots of ways to, this is a good time to think kind of analog as opposed to how do I digitally solve this problem. You can often find a gel that will kind of tip the colors in the right direction of where lighting is. And one thing, especially like when I was saying earlier with black and white, if you're going to do content that's all black and white, it is important when you are creating your content to make sure that it all matches itself on your machine first. Because there have been plenty of times where, I've done a show where we downloaded a bunch of black and white stock footage, for instance, but some of it's got a little bit of amber and some of it's kind of like a cool white. And if you're not really thinking about making sure that all of that stuff is even and equal first, then you're going to find it way more challenging when it's up on the set to match the light quality of lighting if each of your clips is a different light quality within itself. So
it's interesting that you said about having the lighting there while you're doing projections and vice versa. I wouldn't even do a show. I wouldn't light a show without the projections being there because it's a waste of time to me. I mean, I know there's certain circumstances where for some reason the projections aren't ready or the light's not ready or you got to work whenever you can or you got to, split it up. But in an optimal situation, I'm going to want to have those projections up there while I'm lighting the scene.
Right.
So that I can match the colors. And because it's like doing half the light plot, lighting half the light plot on one day and the other half on the other day. Right. You know what I mean? But I understand how there could be situations with scheduling where it can't happen all in the same day.
But it happens a lot in like when you're doing like a corporate event and there's a marketing department that's making content and, they're just constantly sending you new things up until the last second. Right. You hear all about it on upfronts, especially where they get the content 2 seconds before the president of the network shows up.
Oh, nice. I'm glad I don't do shows like that. Yeah. I don't think I do well in that type of business.
But, it's just, thinking about it and making sure that you've prepared your content as much as you can in advance and then, being aware of it. One of the things Driscoll used to actually do when we worked together is he would go into Lightright and he would make me digital versions of all the gels that the lighting designer had spec'd for the show. And that way I could put them in the media server and have a starting place. So like if I knew he was pulling up a certain kind of blue, that I could call up that same blue and overlay it on top of my content to see if we could match the tint. And it was an interesting, fun challenge that, it was never like Pantone accurate, but it got you like 80% of the way there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's great. It's great advice.
You are listening to Light Talk, and today Light Talk is sponsored by
Better Than Nothing Industries. Do you need to dress some cable? Maybe you repair a spot on the dance floor. Perhaps you have some masking that's ripped. Whoops. Not only are you out of real gaffer's tape, you don't even have that cheap grocery store stuff. What to do, kittens? Well, now, just reach for Better Than Nothing gaffer tape. So what if it doesn't work? So what if it won't even stick to itself? At only $8.95 per case, well, heck, it's got to be better than nothing. Which begs the question, do you find yourself at load-in asking, where is my gaffer's tape? Well, now Better Than Nothing Industries has you covered with the Gaffa No-Go. Gaffa No-Go is the 8-foot training leash for you and your roll of tape. Just clip the No-Go device onto your work belt and secure the roll of gaffer's tape to the other end. Every time your gaffer's tape starts to wander off, if you know what I mean, a quick pull and Gaffa No-Go brings it right back. That's right, just like when you pull the leash on that little rat dog when it goes after a squirrel in the park. And if you like that, then you will love the Octopus, an 8-arm version of the No-Go. Just hook it up to your load-in crew and they will follow you around all day like a pack of hungry hound dogs. It's not perfect, but hey, it's better than nothing.
Wow. So in other words, this gaffer's tape doesn't stick to itself on a roll.
No,
so how do you roll it up?
It's crap. When I first started using Better Than Nothing gaffer's tape when I was touring Europe, because people would always whine and say, hey, man, can you leave me some gaffer's tape? So, 50 cents, here's some roll of gaffer's tape. They think I'm a great guy. Then
Don't ever say I never gave you anything.
Right. They go, what happened to this gaffer's tape? Oh, I don't know. Maybe the x-ray machine made it not sticky. But also, it cuts the cost. And it's really it's really easy to get up and there's no residue. So,
Is it available in metric?
It's better. Yes, it's made up in Oklahoma, and we don't have to go into Oklahoma right now, but we know what's made up there.
Yeah, but we could talk about Nebraska if you like.
Oh, now that's like New York City is Nebraska compared to Oklahoma.
And now back to Light Talk.
Well, the sound of those rabid monkeys prancing about the studio tells us that once again it's time for Let's Talk About. And today's Let's Talk About is all about, when do the stage directions for lighting and projections become too specific? Well, we brought this up because actually Zach had a very funny story before the show. Yeah, he had a very funny story. Or was it Steve? Was that your story? It was Steve's story.
I have no idea.
No, it was Steve's story about you guys were going through this new script.
Right, the reading.
And it had all these projection notes in it, right? In the stage directions. Steve? All right.
Yes. Yeah.
And Steve has the last question for the day.
No, you're right. I work on a lot of new scripts.
Right.
And there are a wide range of anything from like really brilliant to really kind of weird and bizarre and needs some work. But we were working on a new script and it sounds kind of interesting. And the gorilla in the room is all these projections. And it's not like projections that are like, put up Paris, France, 1982 on the screen somewhere. It was like they were mapped. It's like the flame crawls up her arm and wraps around her body and her eyeballs fall out. These were really thought out, seriously kind of artistic, acting, objective. They were thought out. They were great projections. And no one wanted to talk about it. So I thought, well, hell, I'll bring it up. Because I'm not the projection designer. Are we doing these projections? And everybody's like, I don't know. The playwright went, well, of course we're doing the projections. They're right there in the script.
Oh, my God.
We see this all the time. We get these scripts and, playwrights are changing. I think, and it's not good or bad, so don't read anything into this, but I'm starting to see a lot of scripts that are written for cinema. They're written for a completely different experience in the theater. Who knows what theater is evolving into? But it's not, let's have a carousel projector and some slides anymore. I mean, Zach knows that better than anybody.
I mean, it's funny because I think that we're finally at the point, I guess, where projections are a thing, and it's no longer a question of like, would projections benefit? Would this show benefit from having projections? To the way that we want to tell this story is by incorporating this imagery that can move and can breathe. And I think you're absolutely right, Steve, that like sometimes I feel like these people write a script and they're like, it might be a play, it might be a television show, it might be a movie, so I'm just going to go for broke and put everything in there. Because I've seen scripts that are like what you said, where it's as detailed as what leg the flames appear on first and for how long, and other ones that just say she's engulfed in flames, like that. And it's up to the designer to sort of figure out what that actually means, or is it even a projected effect? I think one of the things we might have talked about when we had Wendell Harrington on is when I worked with her on the musical Grey Gardens on Broadway. We were brought in because there was one projected effect in the script that was at the end of Act 1, the house is engulfed in vines. And we created this beautiful animation of that was about 25 seconds long, of vines growing up the side of this house. And it ended up that we cut that projection and invented projections for like 80% of the rest of the show that were not in the script, but we just sort of felt them, and they helped tell the story. And so that, there are times now, I think, also the other way around, where we're taking a story that exists in a book or exists in a movie, and we're trying to turn it into some kind of stage play or opera. And we're thinking about how do we incorporate some of these cinematic effects that people are used to seeing, and so I'm going to notate that in my script. I mean, one of the questions that I jokingly said to a set designer once that I work with, where he said to me, the fact that I had the idea that there should be projections means I'm the co-projection designer. And I said, well, the fact that the script says they sit at like a cheap 1950s kitchen table in the script, does that make the author the co-set designer? So there's sort of this idea of the ownership of the imagery, and, the playwright trying to get their vision on stage. And sometimes it's a very specific vision, and it's a challenge because when you're writing this on the page, you don't always really know how it's going to look and feel on stage, and it may require some zhuzhing, it may require some changes, or it may become something that's not necessary or too much or not enough. So hopefully there's a happy medium between the author and the stage directions and the designer's ability to tell the story as well.
I mean, there's nothing new to this. O'Neill was famous for this. And I just did a production of Happy Days with Beckett, Samuel Beckett play, and that was, I think that first performed maybe in 60, 61. But I had to have my assistant go through the script and highlight all of the dialogue because the play was so difficult to read. You guys know it, but for our listeners may not. I mean, here are the stage directions for the opening. The background story, it's a woman who is buried up to her waist in a mound of sand. So she can't move, right? She's buried up to her waist of sand. So, Beckett writes, lights up, long pause, a bell rings, say 10 seconds, stops. She does not move. Pause. Bell rings, say for another 5 seconds. She wakes. Bell stops. She raises her head. She gazes front. Long pause. She straightens up, lays her hands flat on the ground, throws back her head and gazes again. Longer pause. And then she says her first line. That is how the script is. He has written.
Yeah.
Because she is trapped in a mound of dirt. So, it's a unique play in that way, but he has written everything in there. And so one can argue there's not a lot for the director to do but to stay out of the way.
Yeah, Endgame's like that too. He wrote Endgame the same way. I mean,
Right.
that's just his style. That's what he did.
There's sort of a difference there with that versus some things with lighting and projection being very specific, where I can see a situation where if it becomes extensive, especially with projections in a certain way, that you might be limiting yourself in what kind of theater companies can actually produce this work if they don't have the capabilities to create something that extensive. But I will say on the flip side that, like in Rock of Ages, for example, where there were barely any stage directions, that the lighting designer and I have created some things that eventually found their way into the stage directions later, that became permanent parts of the show, which is kind of a cool feeling, to have that ownership. Like, when the guy dies and he walks into the light, that was a gag we kind of made up on the spot. But I always have felt like I wouldn't want to have anything in that kind of script that then if like a junior high wanted to do it, they'd be like, we can't do this because there's no way for us to accomplish that level of detail.
Which begs the question, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, when you read a script and those stage directions are in there, do you try to follow them? Or do you look at that and just go, well, that's how another production did it, and that's an interesting take on the idea?
I think that's a conversation with the creative team. Like, every time somebody does In the Heights, I know they have a conversation about, are we going to have the two buildings like this? And I'm sure that most of the time they say, no, we're going to have a different look. And then it always ends up finding its way back to that because the stage directions kind of end up requiring a certain design. And I think, but that's a conversation that you have as a group. It's like, how tightly do we want to follow this, and how much can we reinterpret? How much are we permitted to reinterpret as well?
It's interesting. There are also questions of what your intellectual property is. Whoever came up with the idea, and then then it gets real messy. But I think that's just okay. I mean, it's okay when that stuff like that happens. Scripts are supposed to be not followed by rote. They're a story that you're supporting. And you could support it with a better idea than what's in the script.
I absolutely agree. I think like the thing that Steve was talking about where it gets into the world of being concerning is when the storytelling is so heavily dependent on the stage direction that if you were to alter the stage direction or what the stage direction describes that they want out of lighting or video, that it would hamper the audience's ability to understand what was going on.
Of course, you never want to distract from that.
Right.
Anyway, so I think we just ran that to the ground. But some good comments, gentlemen, some good comments. So Steve has the last question of the day.
Yes, this is Davey in New Mexico. And Davey writes, do you think the disclaimer on a light plot does any real good if you're pulled into court? So if you don't know what Davey's talking about.
He's talking about my light plots.
I don't know when this first appeared. Any ideas? I mean, was it in the 80s maybe or later than that a disclaimer went into a light plot?
I started doing it in the 90s.
So this disclaimer that he's talking about, if you don't know what it is, I've got one variation of it here. There's a couple floating around. They're not terribly hard to find. But the variation I have, and usually this goes down somewhere near the title block.
Right.
Around
it's from the
area.
contract. It's actually from the USA contract. It's in the contract, too.
It says, this drawing represents visual concepts only. The designer is unqualified to determine the structural or electrical appropriateness of this design and will not assume responsibility for improper engineering, construction, handling, or use. All materials and construction must comply with the most stringent application of federal and local fire, safety, energy, and environmental codes. I mean, what that disclaimer is saying is that you're not a structural engineer, you're not a rigger, you're not a TD, you're not a safety inspector.
Or an electrical contractor.
Right. I mean, you're doing your plot. This is how you want to artistically light the show, and you have some opinions about if you should use a 1-ton or a 2-ton motor, but it's really not your area of expertise. and there is a qualified rigger on the show or a qualified whatever on the show, and they are making those decisions with the production company. So you're good for what you're doing, but everything else, no, not so much. I think, I think it never hurts to try to express where you have concerns. I mean, we live in a age, just ask the Snoot Group. We live in an age of litigation, and I think it's better to be safe than sorry. And why not put it there?
There's one thing you left out that's in my disclaimer, and that is that the designer recommends that a qualified structural engineer review these drawings, an electrical and construction engineer, and if any safety issues come up, the designer will make those changes. That's usually in the contract, and I just put it on my drop because I will. If I have, even if a TD comes up or my master electrician saying, that's unsafe, I'll make the change because they're the experts. I am not the expert when it comes to this. I know a lot about it, but I am not the expert. So, does it protect you? Like Steve says, you'll still be sued, but like Steve says, it won't hurt.
I mean, I absolutely agree. I know I've seen it in scenic drawings as well, where they say we're not responsible for the safety of this structure. This is just the idea that we want somebody who knows how to put it together. I mean, I as far as I understand, in general, the union exam for creating a light plot is that you're able to generate enough paperwork to hand it off to somebody who has those specific qualifications for hanging it. And, so it's openly acknowledged that in that relationship, those things are not supposed to be within the realm of your, plot. And I think it's the same, especially when you're talking about, like, let's say Broadway, where you have these theaters that are 100+ years old. Some of them are historical landmark things. And I want to put like a 300-pound projector on the balcony rail. Somebody has to make sure it's not going to fall down. And it's not me that makes sure of that. So I don't know I don't know of a situation where someone has gone to court, but I can't imagine that putting that information on a document is ever going to harm you.
I did read a little blurb about that someone did go to court. And the producer, and David had just made this point, the producer was pointing out that he did not look at light plots. And the lawyer said, well, what do you do? And he said, I read contracts. And that was a mistake because the lawyer then produced the contract and said, well, let's look at paragraph 7 here.
It says the same exact thing. And
Right.
Here's the thing also. It also protects you from unscrupulous producers who do not hire qualified people to hang the light plots and to hang the projectors. You're not going to have this issue on Broadway because, these men and women who work on stage are qualified. In major regional theaters, they're qualified. In major regional opera companies, they are qualified. They belong to unions, most of them, and they are qualified. But when you work into some of these other places, like maybe it's like a road show or a quick tour that's going out, or maybe it's on a cruise ship. That could happen very easily on cruise ships. I mean, a lot of times you get some guy who's worked in the kitchen and all of a sudden they need an extra stagehand and guess who's there? I mean, some of the smaller cruise lines say this is what they do. So you got to be protected. You got to protect yourself.
Well, I think it's very seductive if you're a young designer and you are wanting to demonstrate that you are the smartest person in the room. And again, I don't think there's any villains here. You want to project an image of strength. I know I have all the answers. I can do everything. Of course, it'll be all right. Don't worry, you've got me here. I think as you grow up a little bit, you realize, that's not the way to approach it. You acknowledge the fact that you are not a rigger. You acknowledge the fact that you're not a great finishing carpenter. You acknowledge you're not a structural engineer, as Zach says. And I think people respect you more for that because people around you who do know a little bit about it, they catch you. They know you're BSing and they know you're kind of dangerous.
And as it's a collaborative art form, you're working with a team of people, you might get stuck and say, I really wanted to put this light here, but I don't know how to do this because of the, structural support or how we get power to that location. And, I always look at the crew as they're a team of artists too. I mean, their art may be a slightly different way than I express myself through art, but that sometimes they come up with solutions that end up enhancing my work. So I'm happy to have their input.
Well, I've been very lucky in having just a really great electrician and a great TD at SMU. And I'll take little drawings to them and say, okay, is this possible? What do you guys think? And sometimes they go, wow, what a great idea. And then sometimes they look at me and go, God, that's really stupid. What are you thinking? How are we going to do this? How can we possibly safely do it? And then actually, after they engineer it, the next thing they do is they bring in the safety inspector. And the safety inspector walks in and slaps them on the back and says, good job. Or he slaps them on the head and said, did you think about this and this and this?
Don't.
So we're always looking for that voice of experience that no one wants a truss to fall on the audience. No one wants a light to blow up. Yeah. And the glass, a par can fall down on the actress on stage.
Yeah. Gravity is the only thing left for par cans. So my final bit of advice is get at least a $2 million liability insurance, okay? It's not that expensive. Do it. So that way, at least you know that, God forbid, you get sued, you're going to be able to afford your legal representation. Snoot, her prices have gone up, by the way, since Stan has been giving her a hard time. I don't know if you've gotten the latest bill, because apparently this contract that Stan signed, that they could raise their prices whenever they want.
We need to get a seventh Fez. And that Fez needs to go to Snoot.
Right,
Christmas present.
A Christmas Fez, yeah. The rocking sounds of the Luminoids tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can hear our show on just about every podcast site out there. Check out our website on lighttalk.org and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast. However,
if you do decide to litigate, the Snoot Group, with the legal team of Sparks, Burnout, and Chase, will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Washington, D.C., and the Lone Star State.
And be sure to join us next week when we talk about more lighting shenanigans and serve you more of our casserole of nonsense.
Light Talk, broadcasting questionable lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So, thank you again for spending another episode of Light Talk After Dark with us. And we'll see you next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.